It's the 13th of May, 2016, and this is episode 51 of the Unseen Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Carr. And joining me tonight for the first time on the Unseen Podcast is Liam Ginty. I'm sorry, Liam Ginty, not McGinty.
Hello, close enough.
Sorry about that, Liam. Liam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a space settlement advocate, sort of, and I'm the host and producer of a show called Voices from L5.
Okay, and you're an expat Englishman living in Virginia, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, by the way, folks, I've been listening to Voices from L5 quite a bit lately, and I really enjoy it, so I recommend that. We'll have some more discussion about that in a moment. Also with us tonight are David Grigg.
Hi from Australia.
And Marsha Barnhart.
Greetings from beautiful northern Michigan.
And Patrick Festa.
Hello from the Jersey Shore.
So that's our panel for tonight. Now, Liam, I want to start off with you. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in podcasting and what your sort of theme is on the Voices from L5.
So, Voices from L5 started as a project to just sort of do general outreach about space settlement. I sort of identified that one of the main problems with space settlement is that no one likes to talk to the general public, or anyone who's involved in it anyway. It's sort of this very closed club of people who hang out in very certain boards and very certain areas of the internet and go to very certain conferences and generally don't do a lot of public outreach. So I thought, if we're talking about humanity moving and living in space, probably going to need to tell the general population that that's a thing we'd like to have. So it started off as a small project in that end. And it just sort of developed into a podcast because that seemed like the best way to get a lot of topics and a lot of interesting stuff out there in a way that anyone can listen to.
Right. And now, one episode I listened to recently that I thought was really interesting was about the Outer Space Treaty and how the sort of the international community could either be an obstacle or an asset in space settlement. What's your feeling about where things are right now? Are we really on the cusp like some people think, or do we still have a long way to go?
I mean, and this is one of the areas that I diverge from the general space settlement community, one of the many areas. I don't think we're really, realistically, anywhere near a large human presence in space. I think we're probably on the cusp of some pretty interesting developments as far as space development goes. I mean, we've got so many different players involved in space, more than at any point in time. And they're all doing more things in space than we've ever been doing in space. And more people are interested in doing stuff in space than ever. But we're so far away politically, legally, socially, financially from being able to actually establish what people would call beachheads in space, where you could actually start developing settlements. Mm-hmm. I don't see that happening for a very long time unless a great deal of things change here on Earth.
Okay, setting aside the technological issues, what do you think the biggest obstacles are?
That depends on what day you catch me. Some days I'd say it's purely economic, that we need to get some of our finances and money stuff together, and a global cooperative could do it, no problem. Other days, it seems to me like the main barrier is a question of social desire to do it. That say, if everyone tomorrow woke up and thought that space settlement was a really good idea, we'd do it, no problem there. Realistically, it's a combination of all of these things, and including like legal issues and other problems too, that just sort of wrap up into a big old ball of issues that you got to sort of untangle slowly.
Right. Now, I'm gonna have to tell you that I'm giving something away here, but I was 11 years old when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of those Apollo orphans who thought, okay, by the time I'm out of college, we're going to be living on the moon, and we'll be looking out to Mars. And that didn't happen at all. It didn't even come close to happening. The So where were we in terms of, I mean, and my analysis of that, by the way, is that it was a combination of looking to the wrong people to get it done and not, and then those people being bogged down in other issues that had nothing to do with space, like, not getting arrested.
Mm-hmm.
So the and then the space shuttle came along, and we all thought that was going to save us, and of course that was a complete delusion. And I was right. I was one of the most deluded. I have to tell you. Uh, so I was a young engineer in 1981 when we thought the space shuttle was that was the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the ones that thought we could make it happen. But so that's sort of my story, and then here we are, 35 years later, and there's been incredible progress done in terms of space science. So, but there's not been. I mean, we understand a lot more about the planets and the stars and so forth. We've had sent unmanned probes, or I guess to following David Grigg, I should say, uncrewed probes, all over the solar system, and we've done an extremely good job with that, and we learned an awful lot. But nobody's living on the moon. Should I? Okay, here I am now, where I'm too old to go. Should I be heartbroken, or should I just accept this? That was the reality.
Well, I mean, you can go either way, right? I mean, the thing is, you can look throughout history and you can see all these points where space settlement, lunar settlement, or freestanding settlements or whatever could have happened if we went left instead of right? Like just after Apollo, the stated mission of NASA was to establish a moon base. That was their objective for like 6 months or so until their funding got completely destroyed. After Gerard O'Neill, the sort of father of the space settlement movement here in the U.S., after he started to come around, NASA got on that bandwagon for about 6 months until a guy called Senator Proxmire cut all of the funding and made it so NASA isn't allowed to spend any money on space settlement. And who knows what would have happened if those things didn't occur? If say the Cold War went on a little bit longer and people were way more focused on beating the Russians for a couple more years. Who knows?
Yeah, and we've spent more on Afghanistan than we've spent on the moon by 2 orders of magnitude.
Mm-hmm. It's this question of priorities, really.
Right, and another story I have to tell is that in 1978 I went to see Gerard K. O'Neill speak. It was a big room and it was packed with enthusiastic young people. And it was almost like a revival tent meeting. He had us very excited. We walked out there, we said, this is going to happen. This is going to happen now.
Right.
1978. And so, and obviously O'Neill's vision, which I thought was perhaps needed some work, but was not completely foolish, not completely fantasy, was never even took off. So okay, that's my story. Let's get into some of these other folks. Who wants to go first? David?
Yeah, sure. I was amused when you said you were 11 years old. You're a youngster. I was started my first year at college when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. And I think that was 47 years ago. Is that right? Is my arithmetic right? It's we're going
almost, yeah.
Yeah, we're going on for 50 years, aren't we? Which is staggering. Half a century since that happened. I'm sure it's all to do with political will, and certainly I think everyone agrees that most of the Apollo program was down to competition with the Russians, who for quite a while were way ahead of the Americans. I remember coming home. You talked about watching Neil Armstrong, but I remember coming home from school one day during my lunch hour, and because we weren't that far away from the school, and hearing on the radio that this Russian guy called Yuri Gagarin had circled the Earth, was first man in space. That was pretty staggering. At that stage, I must have been probably, I guess I was probably 10 or 11 at that stage. Yeah, I would have been 10. And that was incredibly exciting. And there was a whole series of things that the Russians were doing first. The first people to walk in space, the first people to orbit space for more than a few orbits. They were a long way ahead of the Americans. And of course, the Americans were panicked, I think, when Sputnik first went up. They hadn't realized how far behind they were in that whole missile and rocket technology. So you kind of almost need that nationalistic competition, I think, to drive some of this. And that's perhaps why we've got a bit less enthusiasm now, because there isn't that competition. And it would be interesting to see if the Chinese really start pushing, because you can see a growing rivalry between the US and China over various political issues. So maybe that will I mean, it's not a good thing in some ways, but maybe it's a good thing in terms of spurring us on. What do you think?
I think China definitely does see space as an issue of national prestige and of being one of the big boys. And so they have and they are pushing ahead probably harder than anybody else at this point.
I think the other sad thing is that I get the impression from sitting here in Australia, I get the impression that America no longer values science and technology the way that it used to. I mean, when Sputnik went up and there was a huge program to catch up, there was an appreciation of science and technology as being important and valuable. I get the impression that that's no longer the case.
Well, my impression is biased by living here in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is one of the wealthier countries in the world. In the U.S. as well. And we have, I think, a lot of appreciation for what we call now STEM or STEAM, depending on whom you ask, which is science, technology, engineering, and medicine. But yeah, there's always been a kind of distrust of science, which science has not done enough to dispel, in my view, because people tend to see it as kind of an elitism. We know more than you. Trust us.
But they do.
Well, they do, but that doesn't play very well in certain quarters. So you get that, and I think but you also get, everybody here in the U.S. knows that we're really good at engineering, and we spend an awful lot of money on it, and we're really good at, we did catch the Russians in the 60s, and we put that flag on the moon, and then we said, okay, well, we did that. Let's stop now and go spy on the Democrats.
I'd like to agree with David. There is a problem here, and that's actually one of my pet peeves. It's what I try to do on the Google Hangout and Google Plus altogether. I mean, I've got people in my circles who are flat Earth people. I mean, it's utterly silly and ridiculous how people have fallen back to. I hate to mock people, but stupidity. You go from what you're saying about the lack of enthusiasm to downright stupidity. I mean, it is disheartening. But I do see signs on the other end. I know that the New Jersey schools are getting better. When I left high school, by the way, I was 9-ish, 10-ish. I don't remember the exact year or the exact date, but I was around 10-ish when Neil Armstrong.
69.
It was 69. Well, I was born in 59, so I was 10. It depended what month it was. But in any case, it was very exciting. We had a black and white TV. I had my big sister. I call her my big sister. She was the oldest in the family. She had a camera set up in front on a coffee table, taking pictures of the television, and we were doing this as a family thing. It was really exciting to watch this. But now the enthusiasm is gone. Even Neil deGrasse Tyson got up in front of the Senate and said, "We need the political system to excite people again." Even this new vehicle, this Orion spacecraft, this vehicle that's supposed to be able to take us to Mars and elsewhere, excites me, but it doesn't seem to, the people that I see on the street or on Google, that they could care less.
Well, the Orion has some problems, and I can only say this, that I think that those problems are unsolved at this point, which has to do with cost and the ability to launch it frequently. Uh, that was the whole problem with the shuttle. The shuttle was promised as a way of reducing launch costs, and it turned out to be a massive increase in launch costs.
Well, I mean, in general speaking, I mean, I'm excited to have a new vehicle. I'm sure that.
Well, but I mean, this leads us to the question of, is the next wave in space? NASA has done I want to say this. NASA's done a fantastic job of exploring space robotically. NASA, and not just NASA, but Europe and other countries as well, Japan.
Oh yeah,
India and China are getting in on the game. But every planet in the solar system, and if you ask Alan Stern, that would include Pluto, has been visited by a robotic spacecraft, and we now know vastly more about our solar system than we did.
Well, I think it needs to continue with the robots. I call them robots.
Well, no, I'm not arguing against that, but what I'm saying is that in terms of getting our civilization into space, it can't be just NASA.
No, and it's not. But I just use.
And I don't think NASA wants to. NASA doesn't want to take that responsibility.
No, I don't think so. I just pointed out the Orion spacecraft as the Americans knew.
Yeah. Well, let's face it. NASA's not going to get more than $20 billion a year for the foreseeable
That's what I mean.
future.
In other words, they need the politicians need to say, okay, it's time we gave them a little bit more money, even if it was an extra penny a day or something. We need to give them a little bit more money to do something better, because the people in the United States are just falling back in their enthusiasm.
Well, but I want to point out that in Apollo, we threw a vast amount of money at that program.
Right.
And it achieved its objectives, but there was no follow-up.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It was suddenly gone. It was suddenly, after Apollo, it was like there was nothing left, and it is hugely dangerous. These guys went up there with I mean, the dangers involved, the risks that they took with their own lives. These people are very brave people, and now you've got people following around Buzz Aldrin, calling him a liar and stuff. It's like this is really shameful. That's why I'm trying to agree with David. It's gotten to the point where it's literally shameful the way people act.
Right. But I don't know if that's really quite in scope for this episode. But
okay.
My impression is that here in the United States, that science is highly valued, not by everyone, and not by certain leading political candidates, but
well, that's what I'm saying. It needs to be. It needs.
Well,
to be
yeah, but
resparked.
But I do think that we have reaped the benefits of enormous amounts of progress in science and technology here in the U.S. as much as any other country in the world, and we are very, very wealthy as a result of all that hard work that our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers did, and we have that whole effort, a lot to thank for that. But the question is that I have is, are we ready emotionally and socially? And this is something Liam has gone into a lot of depth in his podcast. Are we ready emotionally and socially to become a spacefaring civilization?
Now,
go ahead.
Can
Marsha.
I pop in? I'd like
Sure.
to pop in here. I feel pretty optimistic about where we're going, and I think that the main thing that will propel us forward is the commercialization of space. Now, NASA, there's, like any business, there's barriers to entry. And so when the barriers to entry have lessened, then you're going to get competition and you'll get new businesses come in. NASA, in my opinion, was like the pioneers of old. You had pioneers and you had settlers. The pioneers were the ones who really they broke the trail and they did the hard work. Now, NASA was the pioneers. I would say the settlers now that is going to bring this large wave, in my opinion, to outer space is the Bigelows and the others of that type. I can't think of the other gentleman.
Elon
That
Musk.
is, yes, that type of people. Now, they are now the settlers that are going to be coming forward, and more, I would say that commercial endeavors are going to be having a presence in space. And when that happens, it would seem to me it would only follow that there are going to be more and more jobs and specialties and opportunities for people to get out in near space and start working there. And I think when you have jobs in near space and beyond, that is going to be something that populations will look at and begin to groom engineers and scientists and specialists and all that will be working out there. And so to have that happen by its very nature, I think that is going to entice more people into the sciences and biologies and things of that nature. So I feel pretty optimistic right now. I think we're on the cusp of beyond exploration and into commercialization, which is going to just be burgeoning within a decade.
Right, but I mean, you have to start with right from the scratch. In other words, we have to start with grammar school education. Making science and technologies an interesting thing. And that includes the enthusiasm for space exploration. Now, again, I think it's wonderful what we're doing with Juno is going to be at Jupiter within I think another year.
No, just a few months.
Just a few months.
July,
actually.
I believe it arrives.
July, that's right. July.
Yeah.
I am waiting for that. I mean, the SDO went up. I was all excited about that. The stereo went up. They're studying our sun. All these things are wonderful. I mean, the Mars exploration rovers, and of course, there's dangers of sending humans in the first place out of the Earth's protection of the magnetic field. But those things have to be, continue to research and stuff. But there is a lack of enthusiasm. I'm agreeing with David. Maybe Paul, in your state, you're hidden from the lack of enthusiasm, especially here in New Jersey. There is a certain lack, and to a point in certain states, it's actually a downright stupidity. It has to be curtailed, and it has to start from the politicians. It has to start.
But if a society sees a value in this, I think they would start grooming. The whole system would begin to groom that activity. Now, just take, for example, the psychological grooming that has gone in the schools right now about, when we were going through school, there was no talk about LBGT. But guess what? Everybody from, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade and up, they are perfectly accepting of LBGT. Now, that didn't happen on its own. The whole system in school started teaching kids that this is okay and we're going to go forward this way, kumbaya. Now, if that system could also begin to make sciences and that type of thing something that they're selling the children, it will happen, because the will of society and the inculcation is going to begin and send us that way. And it's very possible it will if society sees
that's
the
absolutely
value in it.
right. That's absolutely correct. But the problem is it's not happening. The politicians in power now are not doing that.
I wouldn't look too much to the
that'll fall
politicians.
away.
They're selling just the opposite.
Well, I wouldn't look too much to the politicians to lead us on this. I think we're going to.
Well, Liam gets involved in this a lot. What's his thoughts on how we're going to go?
Well, it's one of the things that I did want to mention is that there was a couple studies a couple of years ago that show that as far as the nation's concerned, in the U.S. anyway, that support for the space program is not quite as high as it was during Apollo era, but it's still a fairly staggeringly high number. Something like 80% or 70% of people want more NASA funding. So, I mean, people are still in some way supporting of space and space development, but I do hear what you guys are saying, where there's not this vocal. It doesn't feel like everyone's as excited so much. It might just be that people are generally saying, "Yeah, I suppose space could do with something."
Well, public excitement is going to go up and down with the times, right? I mean,
Right.
That's something that if you're skillful, you can play into. But NASA is almost legendary at its inability to to read that and follow it.
I'd actually disagree with you there, honestly. I'd say that NASA has a history of actually being very, very good at playing to the enthusiasm for space. I mean, the support for the Apollo was drummed up specifically by NASA going to Walt Disney and getting him to make all kinds of cool space stuff that got people interested in space. And you see now, I mean, okay, so take Mars, for example. Every single person who talks about space these days talks about Mars and about how exciting Mars is. I don't think this is accidental, that it just so happens to be the target that NASA's focusing on next is a Mars mission. I mean, you even see people like Elon Musk talking about going and colonizing Mars by his lonesome, which I have some questions about, but I think that it comes down to NASA actually investing a great deal into its PR department, for lack of a better phrase.
Well, now on that same note, I noticed that NASA is now embracing Elon Musk. That they're saying, "Hey, yeah, we want to help. Elon, tell us how we can help," because they recognize that he's got the agility to move on things that are difficult for them. They're really, NASA's very good at things like sending the Curiosity rover to Mars. A very focused science mission with very specific objectives and technically doable within the technology we have. But actually sending people to Mars is going to be incredibly hard, and it's not going to be something that NASA can't do it alone. And if they just sit around waiting for other countries to do it, well, they're going to let behind. So, within our own, and we shouldn't be too U.S. focused here. I mean, a lot of countries are interested in this, but if you look at, say, the ESA budget, it's about a third of what the NASA budget is.
Which is to say, ESA can't do pretty incredible things on a third of the NASA budget, but yeah, it's certainly true.
Is that true?
Low. Yeah, it's very, very low. If I was talking to some people from Korea, if you want to compare other nations' space budgets, I was talking to some Korean people the other day for my show, and the Korean space industry, the Korean space program has a $500 million total a year, $500 million. And on that budget, they still launch satellites. But yeah, U.S. is definitely the leader in space budget.
Yeah, and ESA does good missions, but they do very few of them. Like they just did the LIGO demonstration mission, which the LIGO risk reduction mission, which is, I think, a great mission to do for physics and astrophysics, but it's not, it's not going to really take us into the solar system. But
well, I mean, I don't want to sound like all negative, but I do see a lot of cooperation for just to pull one out of the hat there. The James Webb Space Telescope is obviously a multinational effort, which of course includes Canada and ESA, and so that's a plus. I mean, that I see the cooperation, and I find that to be at least a breath of fresh air.
But it's really difficult to make those things happen. It's very expensive to make those things happen. Even though everybody on all sides wants them to happen. Now,
what do you mean, multinational cooperation?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do.
But now take Antarctica right now. The Antarctica Treaty is a multinational cooperation, and there is no human presence. There's no native human presence on the continent of Antarctica, and I think it's a nice, workable treaty there. And they're getting a lot of science done.
Well, if there were oil in Antarctica, do you think that would be the same thing?
If there were oil in it, well, yeah, okay, that could be, but there's still a lot to learn there. I mean, it's just a bunch of science heads.
It's all about science, yes. Now,
but
scientists themselves, the scientific community is very international and very highly interested in cooperating.
Yeah.
It's when you start having to spend a lot of money
Yeah.
And who's gonna provide that money, and who's going to get the credit for it? That kind of thing. You get out of NASA and into the State Department. That's where the money starts to burn, right? And
that's why private companies are going to drive exploration more, I'd say,
well,
because they know how to make a buck and they plan to.
Yeah, well, private companies have the same problem.
Where's the money coming from? Where's the money coming from? That's the issue. Yeah, I mean. I agree with you that.
Yeah.
I agree with you that commercial ventures are important, but they've all got to make a profit.
But look at how much cash just Apple Computer by themselves have. They have more.
It doesn't mean they're going to spend it on blowing it on a mission to
no. But I just mean as an example.
That's right.
That we're in an era where private companies have incredibly amounts of wealth.
Yeah. But they have shareholders too, who they have to justify things to.
Yes, they do. In fact, I'm an Apple shareholder, but
you mad fool.
I don't think I agree they shouldn't spend all 50 billion or whatever it is on going to the moon. But they, that's an asset that's part of my retirement fund. But the reality, you have companies like Google who are actually legendary for taking lots of small bets and a few big bets, and of course you have everything Elon Musk is doing. He's deeply into 3 companies right now, and SpaceX is only one of them. But
I think the point, Paul, is that he was making is that if you've got companies like Google and Apple, look how much those huge gorillas are driving how our society is. So I'm kind of thinking, reading between the lines on Patrick's thought here, if that's what it was from him, what is this commercial presence by these huge 500-pound gorillas? What are they going to be doing up there? It's going to be for shareholder interest, not necessarily for earthling interest.
But this is the interesting transformation that's taken place, is that people like the Google leadership can say, look, we have a plan that's going to make everybody rich. Hang in there and let us invest long term. And that their shareholders tolerate that way beyond what we're used to.
So on that subject,
way beyond what a politician would.
On that subject, we have a question from Buck, our friend Buckfield. Who's buying the space product?
So today I talked to I actually just recently had a conversation with a fantastic guy, Brent Sherwood, on a subject that's very, very closely related to this. I think you guys might be interested in. Brent was analyzing a concept known as a space village. Some of you may know about it. It's a ESA proposal, we'll say. It's not something that they're actually going to do anytime soon, but it's the director of ESA suggested this thing called a moon village, which was essentially a cooperative academic business park on the moon. His proposal was that a bunch of companies and a bunch of businesses and a bunch of nations could come together and finance and build a small moon base that would allow people to do whatever it is they want to do. In his analysis of this, Brent basically breaks down what John Buck's question is here, and what we're talking about a little bit here, which is it's really easy to say that commercialization is what pushes all into space, and that certainly could be true. The problem is, and the question arises, where does that money come from, and what is it buying specifically? So when Brent analyzed this, which you guys can hear a little bit more on my show, he basically broke this down into what resources exist in those environments. And if you're talking about near Earth orbit, if you're talking about out at the moon or at Mars, this is the question you have to ask yourself. What is there that isn't on Earth that people are willing to pay not just a premium for, but an incredible premium for? We talk about things like Google and Apple and SpaceX doing these things. One of the main questions that I always have is, if Elon Musk managed to get every single company he has to put every single dollar every single company he has together, he wouldn't be able to afford to go 1/10 of the way to Mars. That's just an economical fact as it stands right now. Maybe he changes things up later, but that's just how it is. Now, on the moon, you have a couple of things. You have information, which is, science and info about what life is like on the moon, how fluids and dust and things and flame reacts in a 0.6 gravity. You have helium-3, which we have a bunch on Earth. So, you have minerals, and you have some rare earth minerals, and you have oxygen and water. Well, not water, but you know what I'm saying. You have the capability there to make water. So then you have to ask, okay, those are the things you have. Who's going to buy those things? And why would they buy those things? If you can answer those questions, congratulations, you've just solved the space development question forever. But as it stands right now, there aren't really any industries to go for those. You're stuck with this chicken and egg problem where you need massive industry in space to justify massive industry in space.
But isn't it my understanding that in just even near Earth, the manufacture of the purity of crystals for crystal-based technologies, and who knows, nanotechnology as that begins to unfold more and more, just near Earth orbit provides a purity of manufacturing that would right away, I would think, be of interest to many high-tech manufacturers, wouldn't it?
Certainly of interest, and you can see a lot of companies investing in things like that now. It's just that might, if to develop what we're talking about here, which is large-scale development, you need a number of different industries working at a high rate with a massive amount of infrastructure that's coming from basically nowhere. A lot of people in the space settlement community like to talk about this bootstrap approach, which is sort of what we're touching on here, where you start with, say, let's take your example, Martha. You would start with a base in near-Earth orbit that's job is to produce insulin crystals, which grow at something like 30 or 60% better purity than they do on Earth in space. So that's all that base does. The thought is that once that's there, someone needs to supply the raw materials to that base. So you get a in-between sort of shipping company that ships that stuff up. And then someone needs to supply the oxygen, so someone goes and gets oxygen from somewhere else. The problem here is, and that should like snowball until basically you have a million industries working all together to produce a thing. The problem with that is, and why the Moon Village was an interesting idea for this, is that unlike industry on Earth and unlike settlement on Earth, you or I couldn't go into space right now and build a little base to build insulin crystals. I need that oxygen first. I need that water first. I need the crystals first. And I need those first from the sources that they're cheapest from, which is from the moon and so on. Otherwise, it's entirely uneconomical for me to go up there for 30 to 60% better growth. Because
that's where Bigelow comes in. He's got a whole little orbiting lab up there that they'll create things and begin manufacture. Seems to me.
I mean, it's a nice idea, and I certainly hope it does pull it off. But that still isn't industrialization on the level that would allow what we're talking about, space settlement and massive amounts of space development.
Everything is in nascent stages.
But there is an issue of scale, isn't there? You have to have a sort of break-even point where you can do something at a large enough scale that it pays back the initial investment. Of course, it costs so much still to get stuff into space, which
exactly.
It's why SpaceX is great in this whole business of reusing spacecraft. But we're still a long way from it being cheap to get enough stuff into space to make enough of a profit. It comes back down to profit again.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Well, I mean, that's the whole bootstrapping idea is about, is that you get just a minimal amount into space, and then the rest is built from space materials and space resources. And it's not about so much what will Earth buy. It's you have this massive economy in space itself. And ultimately, it dwarfs the Earth economy.
Right, and things we can't even think of now we could manufacture out there that we don't even know we have a need for yet. Somebody's going to make us have a need for these things they can easily, cheaply, quickly, very pure quality create out there.
You're right. I mean, let's look at the New World, right? Who would have thought tobacco was the killer app, right? Tobacco turned out to be one of the killer apps for going to the New World.
Well, literally, Paul.
Yeah. But they went to the New World, and there was abundant resources, abundant
Imagine if you were
material
going
to give them infrastructure.
Imagine if you were going to the New World, but every time to build anything in the New World, you might die literally every single second of the time that you're over there.
Well, but a lot of
because
people
there's no
did die. I
oxygen.
mean,
Yeah.
But they
Uh,
didn't. They didn't explode because there wasn't any oxygen. They didn't, run out of water literally because there's no water anywhere. The
No,
New
but
World was still Earth. with
Jamestown
what-
disappeared.
That's
that
fine,
was one of
but
the.
Jamestown
poof.
could have continued to exist because Jamestown is on Earth, which is an environment that humans can adapt to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Space is not.
Well,
Space
true.
is absolutely and completely, violently against you being there, which
Point
means that to
made, yeah.
exist there, you need to have massive amounts of infrastructure. Just to,
Uh-huh.
I mean,
well, I don't know if it needs to be massive. I mean, I think
You need your
that's a
grub steak.
technological question. That's an engineering issue. We can solve that.
we can solve all of these questions. All of these problems can be solved. Every single one of these issues is at its heart a solvable one. It's just
And-
that there's so many steps to that point
Yeah.
that you have to
And
wonder.
the first one is the SpaceX reusable launcher. That's your cheap, get it up there.
Well,
Well, I think
that's
the
one
first
step on the
is
way
light
to.
flyer, but,
And that's just one company. Now,
Yeah.
there's going to be more and more who are going to provide cheaper access of your goods delivered to your point of production in near Earth orbit. It's going to happen. It's not like, I understand what you're saying, Liam, that, my God, it is so hostile out there that it's a very high percentage you're going to die, because it will not allow you to live otherwise. I understand that's going to happen. I mean, I understand that's the fact. But what's going to happen is that we are going there and we're going to set up manufacture and we're going to be doing that. It's going to happen.
Well, yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
when people came to the New World in the 16th century, right? They were taking enormous risks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but they didn't have to have all their water shipped across the Atlantic
Right.
every week.
or all
And
their
they didn't have-
oxygen.
well,
Or,
Yeah.
I could make water from lots of different things. And I
But can
have,
you do it
especially
without
I
a
have
water
unlimited
production plant?
energy, right? And I don't
Just
have any hostile natives trying to kill me, or I don't have a harsh winter. I don't have diseases that I don't know how to deal with.
Just a statement from our friend Buck in the subject of colonizing, the old times. One small sugarcane island out-earned all the colonies back then.
Ha ha. Ha ha. Yeah.
And who would have thought sugarcane was I mean, when they started out, they thought it was gold, right? They thought they were going to bring gold back, and they did
Yeah.
bring some gold back, but it wasn't the killer app. It was crops.
One thing
think
that
about-
was brought up in my chat with Brent was that future speculative industries might be the thing that is the what you keep referring to as the killer app.
The driver. Yeah.
One of the things that he brought up was something that space has a lot of is asteroids, and inside those asteroids are tons and tons of minerals and materials.
Mhm.
Most of which is stuff that we have abundance of on Earth, and it doesn't make any sense to go get it in space. But some of them have huge amounts of things like platinum. Our current, the way how we currently think and engineer and build things, we make this assumption that we can't really use platinum because platinum isn't very cheap on Earth. It's very, 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 very expensive because there's none of it. But if we can imagine a world where there is almost an infinite amount of platinum, what technologies and what amazing things could exist in that world. And that could be an impetus to go and explore that.
Well, I mean, the first hard drives, or maybe they're still using platinum. They coat the disks with platinum. It's something that they use. That brings me to remind myself of the science fiction Austin Scott Card stuff. The Formic Wars, where they had this whole thing about mining the asteroid field in the Kuiper Belt. But that is science fiction. But nevertheless, that is basically what this discussion is about. Mining asteroids.
Well, what this discussion was primarily about is how are we going to get people involved and the younger people involved in science? And what that makes me think of is, you recall in it was 86 when the Challenger went up. Well, guess who it went up with, folks? A school teacher. And Krista McAuliffe was going to be the forerunner of children being very involved in space, because a teacher was going to go up there and do experiments from space, getting kids involved. However, the big wrinkle was, the Challenger disaster kind of screwed the pooch there.
Yeah.
What kind of chill did that put on?
I was still married at the time. I actually cried.
Well, it was an absolute unmitigated disaster for PR, not to mention those poor people who burned up. But that kind of went.
What was worse was that all the children were out there.
Yes. I was wondering what kind of chilling effect that may have had for some time, because I know NASA was really keyed on getting kids interested in space, and she was what was going to do it. But, it went so bad.
If we try to make space risk-free, we'll never succeed.
We aren't talking about risk-free. We're talking about perception here, and the chill it may have had on young scientists. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
I don't think
it goes right back to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't think it really deterred anybody from science. I mean, I think we understood pretty quickly what the problems were there, and also we all, that was sort of the reality check. Oh, the shuttle is never going to be the path to getting to building a spacefaring civilization. It's a, it costs too much, and it can't be used for anything risky. And I think there's really two different schools here. People who think that everything we do in space has to be risk-free, which is delusional, and people who realize that it's going to be at least as bad as it was for the folks who went uncovered wagons out west and faced disease and starvation and hostile natives. And that's just the reality. It's going to be. And we went, and what was it? 24 episodes ago, we talked to 3 young people who want to go on the Mars One mission. Now, we could debate all night about whether that's a realistic objective, but they were willing to put their lives on the line for that.
Right. Well, it brings it back. What Marsha was saying, it brings it back to everything I've been saying for I don't know how many episodes already about education and the young people. Let me tell you a little story. It's going to be quick, but everything I know about astronomy, except for a quick course I took in some community college or whatever on astronomy, it came from me. And again, I'm going to tell you that lately I've been seeing signs of the New Jersey schools getting better. But I literally did not know anything about astronomy through my grammar school or junior high school. I learned it on my own because I was, a space nerd. I was a really nerdy kid anyway. But to me, that's pathetic. In other words, there was a failure in the education system in where I was living somewhere in New Jersey at the time as a child, because as far as I'm concerned, every child should come out of 5th or 4th or 3rd or 6th grade knowing that at least, if not anything else, at least that our sun is in fact a G2 class yellow dwarf star. I mean, just that fact alone they all should know that. And it turns out that none of them did. Only I knew that. I was teaching my friends that, and guess what? They could care less. But nevertheless, that is a problem to me. And when you have this disaster of the shuttle, it sort of exacerbates the negative. So should NASA or any space agency for that matter, the scientific community worldwide, I'm thinking that they should say to the public, yes, space is hostile. It is dangerous. You can die very easily out there. Just tell the truth. But be enthusiastic about the science. There's got to be a way to promote the science without telling lies. Oh yeah, we could just do this. We could just go out there. No, you can't. You have to know that there are dangers.
Well, if you look at the probability of failure that NASA was putting out there in 1986, right? It was far, far lower than anything realistic, and they did not publish realistic numbers, and they
right.
began believing that the odds of a particular shuttle mission failing were extremely low, and so it was time to send teachers up and senators and Saudi princes and whatever else they sent up.
Well, in fairness to them, the chances, if you look at the whole lifespan of the shuttle program, the chances of any one shuttle program having a problem are pretty low. You only have 2 disasters on the entire 150 almost missions, which is pretty good odds as far as any mode of transport goes.
Yeah, but it was much that was a much worse failure rate than what they projected.
I think that's true, but it seems to me that the idea that you have to convince people that something's safe in order to for them to follow it is completely backward. I mean, we tend to watch extreme sports and Formula One race car episodes and so on. It really, people watch them to see things go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's that edge of the seat. Is this going to happen? Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be a crash?
Yeah,
So
I hate to admit it, but there's a large. I mean, most dangerous sports are for the people who are waiting for the car crash. They're waiting for the disaster. They're waiting for the. Yeah, and I hate to admit it, but it's kind of true. I mean, even me driving down the highway, seeing an accident, there's that lure of did anybody get hurt? But at the same time, there's that part of my brain that wants to see this, and I kick myself in the ass for actually thinking that, but it is true. It's human nature.
Yes, but it doesn't excite you to want to be in an auto accident.
Some people get very excited by the idea of being on very fast bikes and very fast cars because they're dangerous.
Right. So you get those people. Those are the heroes, right?
Well, I think there's got to be a way to make space excitement and everything. Patrick, you're talking about we can't have space explored and settled by a bunch of autodidacts. They have to go through multiple schools and higher education and everything. There's stuff you cannot learn just reading out of a book. So that excitement for education and a willfulness of society to get people into higher colleges and better sciences and that type of thing, that has to be there. And that is something that society has to drive, and it's not.
What's interesting, just a quick thought that comes to me is, following a lot of the people that we're talking about, the younger folks and like kids around the time that we're talking about, they're living in a time when, they're experiencing an economic downturn on the scale of what happened in the 50s, during the Great Depression and stuff. I wonder if the excitement for space could have been drummed up at a time like that back in the 50s, and whether or not the Apollo system could have happened at a time when people were, more focused on finding a good job to feed their families. I wonder if that has some effect on this lack of enthusiasm that you guys might be seeing a little bit.
I don't know, but you would think Star Wars would have had an effect on kids wanting to be out in space. Did it? It was hugely successful, but did it actually increase a desire for children to be in sciences?
Well, I'm one of those kids. I mean,
I think a great
kid when that first Star Wars came out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people actually did. I think a great number of people actually did get excited by Star Wars coming out as a impetus for getting involved in science. I don't know if the new one is sparking just as much interest, but the kids today have a lot of sci-fi to look at, so that might not be.
Yeah, I mean, for me it was Heinlein, but and Asimov to some extent, but we had books in those days that were made of paper.
It ties a lot into what I was talking about before with NASA's PR campaign, where they had things like, movie serials and shorts and other things directed by and made by Disney to drum up support for space.
Well, look, the Martian was that. The Martian.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The Martian was done very much with a lot of NASA cooperation.
I spent the entire time watching The Martian, sitting there. So quick background: as a U.S. permanent resident, I can't work for NASA. I need to become a citizen first. But sitting in that seat for the entire 2.5 hours, I completely forgot that. I was sitting there like, I could join NASA. I could do whatever I want. I could be on Mars, no problem. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go home. I'm going to sign up to a PhD program. I'm going to be on that rocket. And I got home and I was like, oh wait, never mind.
Well, no, you could eventually. Hang in there.
Podcasting doesn't pay that well. I can't.
Although eating potatoes for several months would drive me wave.
actually, Liam, that leads me to a question. Being you say you're not a U.S. citizen yet, and you come from the UK. You come from England.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're living here. You're like my perfect person to ask this question. Do you see an educational problem here compared to England, where you came from? I mean, obviously, you sound very intelligent to me. You sound like you're well educated, better educated than I am. What is your assessment? Give or take.
England and the US have very, very different education systems. I think that as an outsider, I see a lot of problems with what the American education system does and what it encourages here. I spent a year at a university here as sort of a transfer thing, and the experience was difficult, but not in ways that felt challenging, in like positive growing ways, if that makes sense. In England, at least in higher education, which is to say after 16, you are far more encouraged to personal development, and sort of the reins are off after that point. You're given sort of guided projects and a lot more encouragement to build on your own areas of interest and incorporate those into other classes. For example, my degree is in business systems design, and to finish that all off, I did a personal project that was all about space development and space settlement, even though it had nothing to do with anything that I'd done. But I was encouraged to do it. I wrote an algorithm for determining profitability of asteroids, factoring in things like insurance and things like that. I was encouraged to do it because it was a passion of mine. Whereas here, I don't think that would fly all that well until you were getting into master's programs and what have you, or very, very, very liberal schools. That's the main difference between the U.S. and the English, at least, education systems, as far as I see them. I think that we might be talking about two different points, though. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you might be talking about slightly younger, like 10, 11, 12 level education.
Well, I mean, even if you're talking about the higher education, you're still talking about education on a overall basis, because you got to start when you're kids. So the idea of how to educate is still different, and it still sounds to me like it's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that England is a better place to learn, starting from grammar school.
I worked with a lot of Asians, and they would just about sell their firstborn to get over here to be able to educate their children in the States. Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese really, really like going to Virginia. I forget what, it's an actual county in Virginia they go to, because Fairfax, probably it, yes. Yeah. Because getting a kid in high school there, taking the Fairfax system, is tantamount to giving your kid the perfect education to do whatever he needs to do back in Japan, Korea, and China. And the reason I have heard stated for that is that education in the lower grades here is not by rote. You get to think and explore more. But in Asia, it is just by rote learning. Now, personally, I think they learn better that way because they seem to be a lot smarter and better educated than our Americans.
The ones that come over here, we're getting their elite. All right. So you kind of have to scale that, right?
Only the elite can afford to come over here. But they're coming. Guess what? They aren't going to Russia for elite education.
I think the difference is about those cultures, those Asian cultures, and we see it very much here in Australia. The kids who come to school here, or because their parents are now living here, or the students who buy into college here, is I think those cultures just value intellectualism far, far more than Australian society in general, or I guess American society in general. Their parents are so keen to educate their kids at a high level, and yet I don't see that among Western cultures anywhere near so much.
I agree.
I agree.
Not to sound bigoted here, but the old, somewhat bigoted sounding adage about the Amerasian kids sounding, they're so intelligent. It is a cultural thing. It is. I don't think it has a whole lot to do with the actual brain as much as it has to do with the parenting.
Yeah, the culture. The
parenting of these kids is they encourage the enthusiasm of science and technology and higher learning.
Yes.
I mean, I gotta say, I belong to a chess club here, and I had to, I try to teach kids how to play chess, and this 5-year-old I couldn't teach him a damn thing. He was already he's gonna be a grandmaster by the time he's 10. I mean, these kids are, encouraged to learn like this. It's
Not to shoot this down, but we should probably be careful not to generalize something like 2 billion people. I'm sure there are plenty of people in China and Japan who are, not super
right.
with
That's
people
why,
or super
yeah.
intelligent or super
That's
Yeah.
why
in
I'm
science
saying
and
it's not
engineering.
about the actual brain. I'm saying it's actually more about the culture and
Well,
the
it's but
Well, it's
remember,
highly
there's a selection effect,
generalized.
right? People that come over
Right.
here
people. Yeah, the
are
people that come here.
highly motivated to be here.
Right.
I mean, and you'll find that anywhere in the world. I mean, if you said that no one goes to Russia to learn, but I'm sure if you went to Russia and found someone from, Mongolia who went there for higher education, regardless of how good the Russian education system is, that guy had to try real hard to get there.
And we got lots of really smart people from Russia who have a very good basic education. So, some of our best engineers are Russians. Some of and some of our sharpest grad students are from Asia, all over Asia, not just China, but all over. And, but that's a selection effect to a large extent.
Right. Yeah.
But
That's
it
why.
can
That's
also
why
be argued.
I gave the qualifier not to sound too bigoted. I gave that qualifier because of that fact that Paul's saying there is a selection issue here. There's in fact the ones that have the money to get here and they decide. There is that thing where
Well,
they're the ones that get
what
here.
I was going to say too is when you just to generalize, it used to be common that a lot of people would say the caste system in the UK was problematic because up until just recently, as far as I can tell from what I've read and heard, up until just recently, you kind of had to stay in the caste you were born in. And that shot down an awful lot of kids who were naturally smart. There was no way they were going to go to these elite colleges and get smarter. They were going to be a seamstress or whatever. And the same that happens in Pakistan and India. The caste system, up until just recently, held a large majority of people back from higher education who were probably innately exceedingly intelligent.
Well, you're talking about, 70 or 80 years ago, as far as recent's concerned. England's caste system has been around since, it was already massively diminished by World War I hitting, and after that, it was called it wasn't called a caste system at the time. I can't think of the actual word, but effectively the same thing. But after World War I, it didn't exist. So I can't speak to that as far as how much of an influence that has on the country today, because anyone alive when it was around is pretty much passed on.
Yeah, well, I remember reading many years ago, Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, where a talented young man is discouraged from pursuing a college education. But that was, 1880 or something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously still have effects of that where, I come from a fairly lower class family that was pretty poor and all had fairly labor jobs, shall we say, like that didn't require higher education or anything. And I was sort of encouraged to do less pursuing of developing intellectual pursuits and what have you, and it was harder for me to do it, but it certainly wasn't impossible, and it certainly wasn't like I signed up to college and someone asked me how much I made a year or anything like that. In fact, England's social security network has grown so big and helpful now that probably the only reason I was able to go to university is because the state paid for me to do it. So,
well, there it is. There's again, there it goes back to my statement about political support. Where the politicians have to encourage this somehow, and there seems to be, it's sort of the same subject. It's the political support. You have a social security system that apparently encourages the higher education.
Okay. This has been a good discussion. I think we could go on for a long time, and maybe we will at some future date. But I'd like to kind of wrap it up now. We've been talking for about an hour, and what we'll do is we'll have our traditional round of recommendations. Now, last time it wasn't recommendations; it was forecasts. But we're just going to do a forecast once in a while, not very often. So recommendations. So who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go.
Okay.
I will forecast that within a decade, 10 years.
Not forecast, recommendations.
Oh, I thought you said we were forecasting,
No,
not
we did that last.
recommending.
We did that last time.
Oh, okay.
If you want to put
I
a forecast out there, Marsha, fine. But
No, I don't want to forecast. I misunderstood. Okay, I would say recommendation would be to look carefully into Robert Bigelow. I think there is a lot of interesting stuff with that guy, and just a future discussion on that guy alone would be pretty juicy.
yeah. Okay. What about you, Patrick? Got a recommendation?
Well, I didn't actually have one prepared, but now that we've talked, I think I have a couple. Well, they both have.
Just give me
something to
one.
do with
Just
it.
give me one. You save that over
Okay.
for next time.
Well, the idea of encouraging young people and your friends and relatives to teach their kids to get enthusiastic about science. There is obviously, we talked about Juno. You can use a current mission as a sort of a stepping stone of trying to get people enthused. Juno is going to reach Jupiter in July, and this is a mission that's been going on for many years. I don't even remember the day they launched. Get excited about it and show it to your kids. Show it to your friends and relatives, etc. Get them excited about it. Like, look at this thing. This thing went up in what year did that go up, Paul?
Oh, I can't remember. I think it was about 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, and it took a long time to get because they took a couple of trips around the Earth to get that gravity boost and all that stuff, and it is going to be there. And we're talking about a spacecraft that was built like a tank because Jupiter is so radioactive. They had to protect the electronics. Get excited about what they had to do to get this thing to do what they wanted to do.
Well, Juno's the first mission that I know of that is carrying a camera explicitly and publicly admitting that the reason they have that camera is for public outreach.
Excellent. So get them to know this.
All the images, the science mission does not have anything to do with imaging. So it's interesting. Yeah. And there should be some really, really beautiful images from Jupiter because they're flying right close to it.
Well, that's my recommendation. Recommendation. You use a current mission like Juno to get kids excited.
Okay. How about you, David?
Sorry. With me, it's always a book. This is a book that was published about 20 years ago called Full Moon by Michael Light, and he's a photographer who took who went back to the original NASA photographs taken on the moon and did a beautiful job in transferring them and enhancing their quality and producing a beautiful coffee table book, which is what this is. With panoramas and a whole host of beautiful photographs taken by the astronauts on the moon or around the moon. It's just a really, really lovely book. So that would be my recommendation. Can I also plug?
Sorry, Full Moon by what's the name again?
The author is Michael Light. I think he's the photographer as well.
Lighc. Okay.
Yeah, as in speed of light. Can I also plug my books very briefly? I'm a writer. I'm a writer and I have a number of short stories in publications. If you go to www.writeword.com.au/books, you'll find them there. Thank you.
Okay, Liam, you're next to last.
So I got a couple of different recommendations. First of all, if you're at all interested in hearing a little bit more about the various different social aspects of space and space development, you guys can go to the astrosociology.com, which is the Astrosociology Institute's website. Some fantastic people, massive collection of really interesting papers and really interesting discussions on all different kinds of things like this. They talk about education and they talk about, things like my show where they talk about like space psychology and things like that. I'd also like to recommend Marketing the Moon by David Meerman Scott and Richard Jurek. That talks about some of the things that I was talking about earlier with how basically NASA worked on marketing and PR for getting the moon mission going. And if it's okay, I'd like to plug my own podcast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So if you guys want to check out more from Voices from L5 and want to learn a little bit more about the human side of space development, as I put it, you can go to www.voicesfroml5.com or look us up on iTunes or YouTube or whatever you use to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and I found it very easy to find on my Android app. So yeah. Okay, my final recommendation is going to be Raspberry Pi. Now, this started. Some of you might be old enough to remember when computing used to be a hobby. It was supposed to be fun and exploratory and a lot of do-it-yourself. Try to make as much happen as you can with as little money as possible. Well, that hasn't completely died, and it was just a few years ago that a group of British engineers decided to build an educational computer for a very, very low cost, and they came up with the Raspberry Pi, which is built around a cell phone processor, and for a very small amount of money, you can buy a Raspberry Pi, which is remarkably complete. It doesn't have a keyboard, mouse, or monitor. You can probably find some of those sitting around in your junk room, or you can these days you can get a very inexpensive 17-inch monitor for under $100.
You don't even need a monitor to use it these days. You can just remote into it.
You can do that too as well, yes, if you have another computer that you want to use. And it's based on Linux, and actually you can install different flavors of Linux on it. I went with the default Raspbian, which is based on Debian Linux. And its purpose is to make computing a hobby again, and it's done brilliantly well. It's got a lot of worldwide support, and I recommend, if you want to get your kid or yourself back into thinking of computing as a hobby, this is the way to go. It won't cost you very much money to get started, and it comes with all kinds of projects that you can do. You're not going to use it to watch Netflix, but well, you probably could, but you are going to use it to do all kinds of fun things with the computing that you may have forgotten that you can do with computing. So that's Raspberry Pi, www.raspberrypi, that's raspberry with a B, .org. And of course, we'll have links to all these things in the show notes. And just a couple of things before we go. I'd like to note that next week we will be recording our Douglas Adams special, our Towel Day special. We'll record it 1 week from tonight, but we will release it on Towel Day, May 25th, and hope you'll enjoy that. We have a panel lined up that includes some regular panelists plus some people who've not been on before. So it should be a lot of fun, including people that I've been trying to get. Well, I have successfully got on the WoW Signal, another one I'm trying to get on the WoW Signal. So that should be fun. And we did that 2 years ago on the WoW Signal, and that was it was pretty successful. I think we can do even better this year. So again, a week after that, we'll record the next episode of the Unseen Podcast. The topic for that will be bring your own topic. So the panelists on that one will be asked to bring a topic with them. So panelists, if you're thinking of being on episode 53, get in the discussion anyway. Let us know what you're thinking so we can kind of vet it before it goes on air. So if you want to be on a panel for the Unseen Podcast, that is possible for anyone. And just send me an email at unseenpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll let you know what you need to do to get on the podcast. We have a participants community on Google+. We have a listeners community on Google+, and we have a listeners subreddit on Reddit. Mateus Macias has also put together a page on Facebook. So we're all over the place. You can follow us on Twitter at Podcast Unseen. And we'd love to hear any feedback you have, any ideas, suggestions, factual corrections, whatever. If you give us some feedback, we'll discuss it on the air. So let us know and what you think. And if you think you'd like to be on the panel, by all means, please join us. We always welcome new panelists. We welcome panelists from all over the world, all ages, all genders. Everyone is welcome to participate. You don't have to be an expert on the things we talk about. You just have to have good questions. Okay, I'd like me to go around one more time and thank our panelists. We have with us tonight our special guest panelist, Liam Ginty.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be on.
Thanks, Liam, and we'll talk again soon about some other stuff. And David Grigg.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
And Marsha Barnhart.
Thanks for having me, Paul. It was good to meet you, Liam.
And Patrick Festa.
As always, it's a pleasure, and thank you for having me. And Liam, it's an absolute pleasure meeting you. I think I found your YouTube channel, and I'm going to subscribe.
Thanks very much, guys.
Okay, and again, Liam's podcast is Voices from L5. I'll have a link on the show notes. And by all means, feel free to contact us if you have any interest at all in what we're doing. You don't have to be on the panel, but we'd like to hear from you anyway. And this is the Unseen Podcast. It is episode 51. It is the 13th of May, 2016. And we'll see you again soon for our Towel Day special on May 25th. Good night.